Evening, everybody. Welcome out to Cabinet, 11th February, our first one of 2025. I won't say anything new here. First, apologies for absence. We've got apologies from Councillor Phil Whitehouse, who can't join us this evening. We've also got apologies from Councillor Strachan and Janice Sylvester Hall. They're both joining us shortly, though. They assure us, so they'll be with us as quick as they can. Item number 2 is declarations of interest. Any at this point? No. As ever, if they arise during the course of discussion, please feel free to butt in and raise them at the earliest opportunity. Agenda item number 3 then is the community infrastructure levy allocations for 2025. Councillor Farrell, over to you, ably assisted by Lisa Robinson.
Thank you. Yes, so this is an update to Cabinet on our application process of the community infrastructure levy. As councillors, I'm sure will be aware, this SIL money comes in from developers. So when they're building all over Lichfield district, there's an allocation of money that comes to us. A percentage of that goes to the local parish councils, and a large majority that goes to us as a district to use. Last year we set some priorities for SIL under what we called an infrastructure list. So the priorities set out in this report are broadly healthcare provision, transport infrastructure, environment and biodiversity, and lower carbon initiatives and the Carbon Investment Fund. So out of all the applications we received, they were judged and scored by our officers, and it brought out the following winners, if you like, of different areas and projects that bid for SIL. All the bids that won, the 6 of them are in the recommendations 2.1. Includes just under 1.2 million for a new health centre in Burntwood. Includes £200,000 for a canal restoration project, and the rest of them small amounts of money for things including a multi-use games area in Orvorus, a community park in Elford, speed awareness radar signs for Drayton Bassett, and some yellow lines for Wigington and Fisherwick Parish Council. I'll invite any questions.
Thanks. Questions? Go on, Councillor Cox. Get stuck in.
Thank you. I think first of all, it's right for me that the allocation for the provision of a new primary health care in Burntwood is very, very important. I know that obviously there will be reasons to say why so much, but this is a big subject, and I do think it's important. Obviously, in terms of the items that perhaps if I could just focus on that weren't included, I find it strange to work out why some are not included in terms of the around the leisure and sporting activities. I find that these are groups that really add absolute value to our communities, and I think without them, our communities are very much at a poorer state. So I am going to say I'm rather disappointed in that, although obviously I understand the criteria. I struggle to work out some of them that are even close and then were scored but are not awarded. In terms of, if I can quote in a sense, the Lichfield City Council, no match funding here, it's a full quantity. I'm just wondering why the criteria is there, and it seemed to obviously scored where others didn't get scored. I question, in a sense, yellow lines along Common Lane. I know there'd be a reason why behind that, but is that something that the parish council can actually do? Have they got within their, you know, in terms of highways, is it something that they can do? Has that been checked? So broadly, I obviously agree with what we've got in front of us, but I do question. I'm hoping that the next release will probably take into account those community groups offering the sports as being very much key to supporting across the district, with a strong emphasis on that, because they offer an invaluable service.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. And I think I'd remind Cabinet that this SIL process takes place each year, and we can revise the priorities each year. So the last SIL allocation was very sports heavy for the things that we funded. And going forward into next year, we've currently got around £1 million of SIL funding for the next 12 months. And that round funding will commence later this year, early next year. So I'm very keen that we the priorities each year. This year it's obviously been fairly strong towards health. Lots of the money's gone towards this health centre in Burntwood. I'm hoping that next year we can definitely involve some of the sports clubs, but last year was very sport heavy as well.
I think perhaps it's worth reminding ourselves here, I don't think there's a perfect system for distributing SILs. I really wish there was, but I don't think there is. We've historically taken an opportunity-led approach, which says who wants some money, and then we weight them. We've flipped that very recently to say actually we'd like to have a much more strategic focus and actually decide what our priorities are, and then allow people to bid in, but make sure that our strategic priorities are being met. I think its cycle has probably shown us that perhaps need to be a bit flexible about our strategic objectives and perhaps slightly less rigid, but I think that's just, you know, it's another imperfect way of attempting to achieve, you know, the very best possible outcome. I think because Alex is right. You know, last year it was very sports heavy, and we said no, we're all about preemptive. Let's let us do things downstream to get people healthy and active. This time it's gone the other way to say actually people are crying out for health centres. The ICB is crying out for money. Let's go there. The reality is the dial probably needs to come back slightly the other way and give a bit more flexibility in how we determine that. Would that be fair, Alex?
It'd be very fair, and I'd also add that obviously this is community infrastructure levy, so the key word there is infrastructure. So we're trying our best with these priorities to fit that infrastructure boundary as much as we can, and the scoring was done on that basis. But I think as this was the first real year that we've stuck to a more rigid framework, I think we've got a good base to move forward the next year to make our tweaks so that we can maybe get it slightly more perfect. But as you say, Doug, it isn't a perfect science.
Well, in fact, there was another question there about yellow lines. Have we done the checks to make sure? And I suppose this is a generic question about do we do checks to make sure that organisations can actually spend that money before we award them the money? Otherwise, do we end up having check returned to us?
Might be moved on that one.
Presumably they're not actually painting the yellow lines. They've probably gone to the county council and said, we'd quite like to have yellow lines. The county has said, we've got no money, go and raise the money yourselves and we'll do it on behalf.
Ability was considerations in the assessment, so we will work with them to make sure that it is deliverable, and obviously it relies on council working with them as well, but we also work with them to make sure that it is.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, there is.
So just to add, the grant agreement.
Smith.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I like Councillor Cox fully supports still, and I think it's a great thing. There's still money going towards helping. Not all the cost of these, about 10% the cost of in Burntwood. happy the company that could be useful. I do have a question, and I realise this is not for our council to make these decisions because and that's not our job. But I know it will be, and will be out there saying, fine, but we'll have a good and to still money, fantastic. But still money is all about money from housing developments. We would be there saying, well, hang on, the load has been built, for example, in Fradley, in Street Haynes, South Lichfield, or whatever. Why is there not money coming for a health centre, for example, there? Yeah, I know we can't answer that question tonight. That's not down to us to do that. But I just wanted to kind of figure out, and we can only award money of SIL where we've had a bid come to us. Fully get that. I just want to find out, did we do any kind of pushing back or any questions on the ICB rationale for the healthcare there? Do we know what their sort of forward plan is and whether else they're going to need health centres where we can maybe allocate more SIL in the future? I just wonder what kind of research you did around that area is my first question.
I can just take the first part. I might need Lucy to answer the second part, just around why money is spent in one part of the district when maybe house building happened in another part of the district. So out of the SIL money that comes in from developers, we use up to 5% of it for an administration fund that can be used for implementing or administrating SIL as an authority. 15% goes to a neighbourhood fund, which goes into those areas where building is taking place. It could be 25% if they have a neighbourhood plan, which is a lot of parishes, and then the remaining 70 or 80% is spent on infrastructure that supports growth within the district's authority. So that's kind of an answer as to why it could go elsewhere. In terms of the health stuff, I probably need Lucy to give a more detailed answer.
Yeah.
Not the ICB, and throughout the application, also expressed that building was the high. And obviously that's the scheme that they wanted to live for a long time, and that but obviously I will where we're going, and Lichfield was discussed, so they're aware that while they want to increase capacity, but they haven't yet found the solution. So there are definitely really good issues that want to explore next, but at the current time, thinking that building is now high priority, and that's what the same possible.
I just wanted to double check that they did get to some sort of forward plan for further SIL rounds that they can bid for that. So that's absolutely fine. The next question I have is just looking at list of bids, all very good and all very viable. Do we tell me a little bit about how do we ensure that we attract, if we've got some SIL money to allocate, how do we ensure that we attract all the possible organisations and people, etc., that may require SIL money across our district? What's our marketing policy for doing that to make sure we get the bids in?
Yeah, well, we do a press release. So there's one went out on the 24th of October. That goes to obviously anyone who reads the press. And then we have a specific list, a database of our stakeholders. So the majority of SIL applications come from parish councils, but we've also got stakeholders of developers and local groups, community centres, that kind of thing. So we sent an email out. Was sent on the 22nd of October, and then another one sent out on the 4th of November. And I don't know how many exactly is on the list, but I think it's in hundreds, isn't it? You see, of people in that list. So that's how we currently communicate. Happy to take any advice on better ways of getting it out there. But I think, given the number of applications we get, I think we probably reached the right amount of people who would be applying for SIL.
Okay, cool. Cheers. And the last question I've got.
Go for it.
Okay. Whilst I fully agree with the leader that the setting a priority list before we do the SIL round is the correct thing to do, okay? Because then we give ourselves some sort of a little bit more structure on the kind of areas we should be allocating the money to. So, for example, this time it was deemed from the priority list that leisure and sport type activities were a little bit lower down, because quite frankly we used a lot of SIL money on those last time around. So cool, that's what the priority list is for. I think I know the answer to this, but I just wanted to confirm to the cabinet member, it's that priority list is not set in stone from this point onwards. That priority list will be reviewed and changed every time we have a SIL round. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah, and it'll be reviewed later this year, yeah.
Okay, Brilliant, thank you. Thanks, Doug. That's me done,
She
cheers.
says, no, it's not.
If I can just add that it will be part of our infrastructure statement, which is done every year.
Yeah.
So that will come to Cabinet and Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Yes,
So every year there will be discussion about what the priorities are, and we will ask for obviously members any plan into that.
okay,
So it will be an annual thing as part of the infrastructure funding statement.
great, thanks, Lucy, cheers.
It might be worth adding also that looking back, the infrastructure statement came to ONS last year as well, and they approved the priorities.
Thank you, Councillor Farrell.
Can I just-
Councillor Cox can have another bite at this area. Go on.
Well, I am. I'm just really trying to set the scene for the future as well, in many respects, because obviously something we obviously referenced into infrastructure, but the sporting groups, that etc. clubs, you know, it is infrastructure that they're wanting to put in place for their activities to continue. So in a sense, I very much urge then that from what Lucy is saying, that kind of reasoning for them to try and capture them and to say that those bids would be more successful this time, next time round than this, is that we're not going to trip them up with a set of strategy or criteria that means yet again they know it. And I appreciate that the leisure had a big chunk last time, but we were very much concentrated in one or two areas where, if you look at the invitations here and the responses, there's been a various number that have come forward, and it's that kind of thing that I'm just looking down the line, because you know we these activities do keep us healthy, do keep us within our communities and everything else. And I think we mustn't lose sight of that. And I just want us to really set the scene going forward that we address that and make sure that we're capturing it. Because if we're not careful, what we do, we can set our criterias and sounding like somebody else in its authority. But if we hang ourselves too much on and focus, if we were to say on how to prevent and slow down climate change, actually it's today that the issue of climate change that we might need to be responding to, rather than thinking how do we slow the process further down the line. It's about today and the consequences of, and making sure that really what today's society is looking at for today as well as going down the future. I'm not dismissing it, I'm not quite like the other person, but I'm beginning to think that we must also value today rather than tomorrow, because without those groups there won't be a tomorrow.
So I think we're asking for some flexibility in that policy.
I am very much so.
Fully understand that. Cool. Okay. Alex, you want to move to your recommendations or any more questions?
No, just to round up to say it's been it has been heartwarming, I would say, to hear from all the different councillors who have the same kind of passion that Councillor Cox and Councillor Smith have had. Lots of phone calls this week from people who saw this paper and said, yes, I'd like some SIL money in my area, please, and kind of told me about all the lovely projects they're doing. So hopefully in the next round we'll have even more bids coming forward, because people really obviously care about infrastructure in their local area. So I'm happy to move those recommendations in my name.
Brilliant. All those in favour, then if you can stick your hand up, that is unanimous. Thank you very much. We are cool, aren't we? We're not, we haven't got that few people here. Brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Farrell, and thank you, Lucy, as well. And Lucy, you will no doubt be keen to leave at an appropriate point, and you're more than welcome to stay for the rest of the evening if you like, but I want to take us up on that. Right, next item up on the agenda then is the debt recovery policy. In the absence of Councillor Strachan, I'll do a quick intro and then hand over to Lily Barton to do the detail on this. But essentially, this is a 2019 policy, which is to date. This tidies the debt recovery policy up. It puts it in a thematic approach so people very clearly and easily see what our approach to each different debt type will be, what our approach to debt recovery activity will look like, and really just help set out in as a sort of transparent process as possible our approach to different forms of debt from right across the council. The recommendations, when we get to them, essentially approve the adoptions and publication of that policy, and then delegate any final amendments to Councillor Strachan. But it also then authorises delegated authority to the Revenue Benefits and Corporate Debt Recovery Service Manager to manage those exemptions and policies on a day-to-day basis. Lizzie, is there anything that you'd like to add, some more flavour and depth to that very brief introduction of the paper?
I think only that, thank you, Chairman. I think only that in pulling the policy together, we've tried to be guided by principles of fairness and respect. So we're committed to treating all customers individually, distinguishing between those who cannot pay and those who choose not to pay. And for those genuinely struggling, the council, through the policy, offers support through discounts, relief and affordable repayment plans. And a key feature of the policy is an emphasis on early intervention. So issuing payment requests and recovery actions promptly to prevent excessive arrears. And it also formalises our write-off processes for cases where repayment is genuinely unachievable. So really, in adopting it, we're aiming to balance effective debt collection with compassion and fairness, ensuring that the funds owed to the council are recovered to support the services that benefit our community.
Thank you. You can see at the data assessment the current levels of debt from people who haven't paid various different sorts of income. Any questions? No. It's going to be a very quick paper then. Ask lots of questions because we're going to have to go to the MTFS in a bit, and I don't want to do that one.
It's seeking clarification. So if I go to page 24, the financial implications. So we set 25-26 through to 28-29. What would be? I'm sure there is an answer. Additional revenues collection capacity. Why is the variance, although it may be considered small, from 92,000, is it, I presume, 86, 88 and 90? What's the rationale behind the variance?
Can I ask Anthony to jump in on this?
So I believe it's because in the first year we've assumed there'll be some recruitment costs for the individuals. That's why it's so much higher in the later years, and then in later years it goes up really just for pay awards and inflation.
That's the question. Yeah. Good question from me, if I may. So in terms of the different approaches, so we've got the debt levels under the data assessment piece. So totally understand the fairness, respect, all of that in terms of council tax and determining who can't pay and who doesn't want to pay, and all of those reasons. When it comes to sundry income, so the 2 million, I'm reading that as corporate debtors rather than individuals. Would that be a fair assessment of that number? I suppose I understand we should have a different approach to corporate debtors rather than residents. And I'm just wondering if we can talk us through that approach in terms of corporate debtors. Presumably we have a much different approach because these are the businesses who are trading with us, and we should perhaps be a bit more hardline with. Is that the case?
We do adopt a different approach, which is set out in the policy, certainly. We are, however, compassionate because some of these are smaller businesses. Some of these are businesses that need our support and have cash flow issues. So we do work closely with them as well. We have an approach where we keep very closely in touch with businesses that owe money, have a very open narrative with them with regards to why they can't pay, and we'll put in place repayment plans that enable them to continue trading as well as repay the debts that they owe us. Where we can keep a dialogue open with businesses, we will do that, and that's the same with residents as well, and we'd far prefer people came to us up front and talk to us. But the different sanctions and actions that we will take do differ between council tax and obviously sundry debts, and they're laid out in that policy.
Okay, happy with that. And then, like the final, the harshest people that we don't mess around with is developers, right? For 106. We're not kind or compassionate to them, are we? We nail them. Good.
Absolutely.
Right answer. Good. Right, any more questions on our corporate? I think as it set out in the paper, this isn't really a huge shift in policy or anything. This is tidying up a 5-year-old document just to get it into a better place, perhaps help it be a bit more readable and transparent in terms of accessibility.
Yeah, and we want people that owe money to know the processes that we will follow, so it's easy for them to understand the next steps, and having that in place means that it's easy for us to guide people to what they can expect next, and in itself that helps to encourage people to think, well, actually I will pay because there was a transparent and robust process in place.
Okay, thank you. No questions, then I'll go to the recommendations at 2 point. I guess that they're at 2.1 and 2.2. In agreement with them? Yeah, Richard. Yeah, super. Right, that's unanimous. Thank you. Next up is our empty and second homes council tax policy. So this paper, again, in the absence of Councillor Strachan, forgive me because I'm going to do a very high level overview of it and then look scared Lizzie for some more detail on it. This policy essentially enacts a decision that was taken last year by full council to bring in the policy which would charge we have with our wording here, it's 100% premium on top of the tax, doubling the council tax for empty homes in the property or second homes. The key driver behind this is to ensure that there aren't empty homes left around in the district that could otherwise be being used for housing. We know at any one time there are several hundred people waiting on a list for housing within the district. And this is just one of the small ways that we can help apply the right pressure in the right way to make sure those houses are freed up. There are exemptions, and I know we've had debate about this before, but there are exemptions for people who are using that house for specific purposes. So if it's for work, etc., in the district or for other reasons, there are exemptions under this policy. It's not to penalise people who have got valid reasons for needing that home, but equally, we do need to make sure that we've got a supply of housing in the district which works for our local residents. Lizzie, is there any additional detail you want to give us on this before we jump into questions?
No, thank you. I think just to reassure that we have included discretions and exemptions to help people facing medical hardship, facing financial hardship. And we've also added in for the second home, people are contributing to the local economy or providing vital local services by working in the local area, that we are disregarding those homes as second homes under the new policy. So those will not incur that premium on top. The ambition really is to target those homes that really are sitting empty and idle and are not being used and could be brought back into use as valuable housing stock. And to encourage those properties to come forward. But again, we encourage anyone who has got a second home or an empty home to come forward and talk to us so that we can guide them appropriately so that they can bring those properties back into use.
Thank you. And just for sort of reference to the exemptions and the discretionary reliefs from the premium, I'm sure there's a difference between the two, is at 3.6. So both empty homes and second homes, and the exemptions are all listed out there, which gives you the detail around that. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, I very firmly recommend this. I'm keen that we're not seeing those empty properties because I think the pressures that we're put on as a district and then in terms of development and housing numbers, and yet we have a significant number. And one of my real issues as well is as the blight of HS2 that has occurred within our district and the number of compulsory purchased housing that they have obtained over the years. I'm hoping that this policy is going to send a strong message to them to put those properties back into the housing market, especially those that may be on the route of the phase 2A, which I suppose does affect my ward, but at the same time, because I do know there are a number of properties there that are lying empty, and there's including a grade 2 listed building in Hansacre. I'm assured by HS2 through their letting agent that we're hoping to see in the spring that particular property go on the market. Get somebody back into that, living in that property. It's going to be constrained with grade 2, and a lot of these buildings are grade 2. Of course, they will be constrained, but they just can't be left lying empty. It's not right, and the pressures that the authority has as a whole through housing numbers. So I'm hoping it will send a strong message to HS2.
Absolutely. I think in that respect, Lichfield on its own, maybe not. However, this type of policy is being adopted up and down the country, so HS2 will feel the pressure of these types of policies. I would say that HS2 have been very open with us with regards to exploring alternative use of properties that are currently sitting empty, so I'm hoping we can see some movement on that soon, whether through this policy or other actions that we take.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any more questions on this? I know it's generated some debate. Councillor Smith, over to you.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I fully support the paper. I fully understand and agree with the concept of trying to identify homes that are long-term empty and therefore not used and therefore waste. And I fully support what's been able to use our council tax raising powers to assist with that problem. The first question I have, this may be a bit of a naive question because I'm not the money man on the cabinet. When we say we're doing 100%, 200%, 300%, 400% of council tax, are we talking about the district council's portion of the council tax, or are we talking about the entire council tax levy? Quite significant, isn't it? Okay, that's my first question. Does that mean we have to discuss this with our authority partners who we gather the council tax for, or does that not mean? Or I'm guessing we've done that, or we will do that, yeah.
We don't have to. They're aware of what.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just checking how that operated. Yeah.
They will receive some of the funds as a result of the extra income.
Of course, yeah.
And I think probably important to point out there, when it goes the other way, so where we operate discounts or exemptions, etc., we don't then necessarily have to discuss that with the county where we reduce it as well.
Understood. So in terms of the two types of premium we're doing the empty homes and we're doing the second homes. I think the empty homes is absolutely spot on. That they're empty for a number of months and some lots of months. So that's absolutely spot on. I've got a few concerns about the second home ones. I just want to make sure that we've not got a policy that doesn't discourage people to come to our district for work opportunity. I just want to check what when we say the exemption to the second home under 3.6 on page 54, it talks about exemptions apply to job related dwellings. And I just wanted to make what that actually really means. Yeah. So if for example, I was living down the south coast and I got myself a 24-month contract within our district, and I found the best way to live and do that contract was to basically buy a property to live in whilst I was up in a flat or whatever. Does that job related dwelling include that example, or does it not include that example? I just want to make sure we're not sort of discouraging people to come and work in our district when that's obviously the best, rather than paying a hotel 5 days a week or whatever is what I'm trying to get to.
So thank you. The job relating dwelling that's actually referred to under class J is actually a type of dwelling that might, for example, be associated with a pub. So you might live above the pub and you're required to live above the pub. Yes. I think what you're talking about, Councillor Smith, is more if I direct you to 3.7 and 3.8, which is on, I don't actually have the pack from the
54, I think. Yeah.
what we've included is a community workers and employers local exception. So where people are working within the district and the second home is within the district, either they're providing employment or they're working in local businesses providing local services, then we will disregard that, so they will not pay that premium. But that's not a nationally set exemption, that is a local discretion. So that's what we are proposing, is that those people that work in our district.
So I think you've answered my question already, literally. Okay, brilliant. That's fantastic. Yeah, cool. I've got no more questions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Right, okay, no more questions. Fantastic. Let's go to the recommendations then, which are contained within the paper. That's 2.1. Yeah, to 2.1 and 2.2. All those in favour? Yeah. Is that a reluctant hand stuck up down your end? Yeah. Brilliant. That's unanimous. Good time. Good job. Perfect timing, Councillor Strachan.
Thank you. How much have I missed?
You've all the difficult bits apparently.
Okay.
We're just moving into the Money Matters 24/5 financial monitoring paper.
Fabulous.
Do you want to do the intro to that?
Can I ask Anthony to kick us off while I
Yeah, absolutely.
reach my laptop out and I'll catch up with anything I need to deal with in the meantime.
So there isn't a lot to say really. So this covers the financial performance from April to November, period 8 of financial year 24/25. Good news is there's no further call on general reserves from the projection at Q1. We've got budget pressures that total 30k, but we can offset that by additional treasury management income, principally because interest rates haven't fallen in line with the expectations. So we've got a little bit more money. We're likely to achieve the capital receipts budget because although there was some risk around the Venture House sale, an alternative offer has been accepted and that's now progressing. The only other point I'd probably make is council tax and business rate collection is lower than the same period last year, which goes back to the policy that Lizzie brought before us earlier. The likelihood is that's going to mean higher arrears and increased bad debt provisions, but part of the reasoning behind putting the additional capacity into the revenues team is to try and address that in a proactive way rather than dealing with it at the end of the process when it becomes bad debts. That's all I wanted to say.
Brilliant, thank you.
Right. I'd only add to that it's difficult to read this paper without reading the one that follows it because they're effectively intrinsically linked. One sets up where we are and then the next sets up where we're going with it. The recent year has been relatively kind to us, and the joy of that is that we can carry out our financial planning from a position of relative strength, where we've managed to generate in-year growth that will then be bringing forward into the MTFS. And so I just place on record my thanks to Anthony and the finance team for their incredibly talented and prudent approach to budget setting and to how we've managed things in the last financial year. I'm sure there will be questions.
I'm going to start off with highlighting a number which we highlight every single page every time this comes through, but usually for the wrong reason. But I think this time it's for the right reason, and that's the disabled facilities fund. The good evening. The disabled facilities fund historically has always been the #1 item of capital slippage whenever we look at our finances. It just always has been, and to actually see that this might not make Anthony very happy actually, but actually that we've exceeded our approved budget disabled facilities grant is I think for most people in the room a brilliant position to be in, that we've actually managed to get that money out the door and working and doing the thing that it absolutely ought to be doing for our residents. So I just think we should absolutely draw attention to that number. The dial seems to have gone slightly too far the other way, but I think that's a nice problem to have, that most local authorities up and down the country would love to be in that.
No, absolutely. And I'd pay tribute to the officers within LWMTS who've been delivering that. We had, as I recall, a few concerns when we took this back in house and then placed it within the wholly owned company. The first was the extent of the backlog that we were going to inherit from the third party provider. That was eliminated within, I think, 7 months, Simon, certainly around there. The second was whether we had the capacity on board to deliver it. We've clearly shown that we have, and that capacity continues to grow. And then the third was whether we would be able to be more efficient than a technically expert company. We appear to have absolutely smashed that. And so, yes, while there is a relatively small overspend, it's almost the cost of our own success in how well that scheme has been administered. And I look forward to seeing it continue in rude health for hopefully many years to come. It really is making those adaptations that people really need, and it's actually a real example of us managing to turn things around and deliver well for the communities.
Can I just add, being you raised the subject of the overspend.
I'll be back.
The government has allocated a further tranche of funding to upper tier authorities through the Better Care Fund, which we will get a share of when it feeds through the sausage machine. So the budget that's in here will increase and reduce the overspending year. But what we also are able to do is move money between years to balance profiles of spend.
Thank you, Anthony. Right, any other questions about the paper? As Rob's kind of said, it's difficult not to get these questions wrapped up in the next paper, really. On the financial.
Yes,
Yeah, it's been as page.
it was minimized.
There you go.
Apologies for my lateness.
Yeah, I probably also get my apologies in now as well.
It's all right. We gave them well we gave them at the beginning of the meeting. You're all right. Okay, if there's no deep and meaningful questions on this one, then I suggest we get these recommendations through and then perhaps push out on the issues in the MTFS paper. Then Rob, if that's all right with you.
Very well, leader. In that case, I move recommendation 2.1.
Brilliant. All those in favour? Yes, yes, yes. Unanimous. Thank you. Straight on to the MTFS.
Thank you, leader. This is the last time that the MTFS will come before Cabinet before it moves towards full council for hopefully ratification on the 25th of February this year. And of course, I'd remind members that that is the decision point. Traditionally, we describe medium-term financial strategies as living documents in that we have the leave to make amendments to them throughout the financial year, but that normally they crystallise throughout the months of January into February. Never before has the phrase living document been as true as this year's MTFS, because of course a council under no overall control, we are indeed under a duty to consult with other parties who are at the table. We have done so, and I'm delighted. Well, I say delighted. Pleased to report that following what I think were productive cross-party discussions last week, of the £2.3 million of growth that I referred to in the last budget, we had at one point successfully spent £6 million of that 2.3. Following a productive meeting, I think we've got it down to 3.8, and I understand that further discussions are in train as to whether we can cut our cloth accordingly. It's perhaps not ideal to be spending the entirety of a year's growth in the following budget, but that is where we are. It's also unlikely to be ideal for there to be any overspend at all, because that then has to be funded through either internal or external budget, both of external borrowing, both of which have a cost to this authority. And while it is currently cheaper to borrow internally than externally, it still means there are projects that we are effectively defunding in order to bring forward the in-year and at this point asks. And so I do look forward to further detailed conversations with colleagues to deal with that. While I'm at this point of the MTFS, I will need to make an amendment to one of the recommendations. I'm just scanning through which one it is. It's 2.1. And that is at the end of that recommendation, I need to add the words "and any other changes necessary to finalise the MTFS prior to council." That is a very broad delegation that I'm seeking, but it's simply so that the finally negotiated position can be placed properly before council on the 25th of February, in order that we put a document before the before full council that reflects in detail where we've been and where we've come to. Leader, there's very little that I really want to add in terms of speaking to this. I will invite Anthony to deal very briefly with the final settlement, which we've now received or now received the details of, in terms of whether there's anything that he needs to update. But in terms of the budget, it's all there. It's before you. You can see the programme that we're seeking to go by. It is a budget which will hopefully balance in year, or appears to balance in year one, which of course we are legally required to do. And the budget also carries within it a small reserve, which we would historically have transferred to reserves to spend further on, but that is now to use in year as a growth or resilience item. The position on council tax, which Leader, you know, I tend to try and make that decision as late as I possibly can, because I don't like to see this authority taking more than it needs to with what is such a regressive tax. The core case, I still believe, should be a £5 a year increase for a Band D house. But I understand that a product of negotiations may be that view is not necessarily shared by all people who attend on the 25th, and that may be subject to robust debate in the fullness of time. Subject to that, I'm sure there will be questions. I will invite Anthony to update you on the final local government settlement, and then we might as well take some questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rob.
So on the core spending power element of the government settlement, which is the table at 3.17, page 94 of the pack, there was no change to the provisional settlement. The only change that's impacted the council as part of the financial settlement is the recompense for the increase in the employers' national insurance contribution increase. The government consulted on a series of different bases in the provisional settlement, and one of the strong views that came out, not from this council, but from a lot of other councils, was there was no account of housing authorities. So in the draft or the provisional settlement, any council with a housing revenue account was getting no compensation for the increased national insurance. The government have addressed that in the final settlement. What that's meant is they've taken money off other councils to enable housing revenue accounts to have a share of the sum. So that effectively means we've got less cash, and the difference between what we believe the cost of this is and what the government are recompensing has increased to £126,000 in 25-26. So that is a budget pressure for that year and potentially future years.
Questions? Comments?
Yeah, can I
Players?
just start on that first question and then
Please.
I can come back in? So looking at employers' national insurance, one of the things that I'd picked up in here, and it might be worthwhile just clarifying for my understanding, please, Anthony, is that it was allocated for direct costs. And I wondered how we fared with regards to the impact of that and any recompense within the trading company as well, and how that is likely to impact on what our plans are, potentially the impact of that cost.
So the guidance that came out originally, and I've described it as nebulous. So originally the government was going to recompense based on the employment cost of staff in the public sector, which would have excluded WMTS staff. They've taken a different approach when they've come to the file, principally because I think the consultation responses highlighted there was an issue with housing revenue account authorities, which so we've lost that in that sense. But they've used net expenditure to allocate, so that has the advantage of allowing some money towards LWMTS for the services that they charge to us. The problem with the basis they've used is because they're using net expenditure, takes account of things like fees and charges, so it doesn't take account of the gross cost to the council, which is why we've got a gap, and I think most authorities have got a gap here. I don't know why the government have done that. You might make a view that they believe that you can recover some of this additional cost through the fees and charges you levy. I suppose from a finance point of view, that's not what was said originally though, and that's the difficulty. It just highlights the difficulty in financial planning when guidance is very nebulous, and then a consultation is provided, there's a weight of opinion and they change it. It's quite rare for that to happen between a provisional and a final settlement.
And certainly that was one of the things that jumped off the page for me as being that element of risk factor as well. So we're looking at how much potential costing. Do you want to carry on with a couple of other questions?
Yeah,
Right.
get them all out.
So I think it was page 103 where we've got reference as well to significant reduction. Significantly reduced total resources, I think was a reference on those. And I was just wondering what the impact, where we've got those highlighted.
3.45.
It is, yeah, the bullet point just underneath the table there, that the projections are showing total resources significantly reduce. And I just wondered again what the impact, what you would ascertain that to be.
Yes, so council's made a decision previously that it would like to invest quite a number of the earmarked reserves in delivering capital investment, whether that be through the cinema, the leisure centre, etc. So it's a conscious decision council have taken. It's not using those resources to balance the budget, so that's a good thing. You should only really be using reserves to fund one-off and short-term pressures. What that effectively does though is it means we've got less money in the bank, so we earn less money, but we profile that in the medium-term financial strategy. So the strategy that's in front of you takes account of those reductions in reserves, working capital, etc. And it's been done in a sustainable way because in addition to the cost, a number of these projects can have income. So leisure centre as an example, yes, we're investing 7.3 million, I think it is now, 5 million, that is borrowing, but that's to provide a better leisure centre, which should generate more income and have less costs, which means it's more financially sustainable than we've currently got.
Road sites, I think we've got figures for income coming in for 27-28 for those. Anticipated for when the transfer of the funds are likely to come over. Yeah. So I think there's been some questions to myself about the contract going forward, because I know the sales time was up quite a while, and making sure that that was all followed through, and that's likely to be then just the transactional to it.
So just on that particular one, so we've made an assumption that capital receipt will come in 27-28. Within the capital programme, there is an assumption that the 3 projects that are funded by that receipt will be effectively forward funded. So you can undertake the capital works in advance of the capital receipt. We will bridging finance that for that period until that money comes in. So it's not, the delay in receiving the receipt isn't holding up the delivery of the 3 projects.
Thank you.
Any more? No.
Leave the other
All
one.
good. Right. Councillor Cox.
On 3.17, you referred to that, Anthony. Can I just get my head around the for the new homes bonus in terms of the variance, in terms of exactly what does that mean?
Do you want to take this?
So effectively and easily, it means we've received less in new homes bonus in 25-26 than we received in 24-25. That's because we've delivered less houses between the 2 financial years. I'm from memory, I think we've had a bumper year in 24-25, so stellar year in 25-26. May be different to what you see on the ground, but they've got to be actually in a position that they're completed and appear on the council tax register before new homes bonus is paid. And part of the settlement is that the government have said this is 25-26 is the last year of new homes bonus in the form it's in. So whether there will be some sort of replacement moving forward or the funding will be distributed in different ways.
Right, okay, no, that's fine. It's obviously just wanted to, we see out there a tremendous amount of development and everything, and it's obviously how it works. I get that now. Thank you very much.
Just following on from that question, in terms of lag between a house being constructed and us actually recognising them as eligible for new homes bonus, what do we think that lag looks like?
I don't know whether there is a simple rule of thumb. I mean, I believe it's an assessment the valuation office agency does. So we will identify that the property is there, it's been built. It's up to them to bring that onto the list and allocate it to council tax band. So it's an independent third party that's doing that. I think our role is that we highlight or flag to them that are completed and ready to be occupied. It's their assessment then when they actually bring them on. But I mean, you'd hope it would be months, but you know, you get a situation where a lot of houses are being built and they've got a limited amount of capacity that could elongate out quite easily.
I think it's a mark of that variance. I mean, normally a £500,000 adverse variance would be starting to set off alarm bells, but it's a mark of how we've treated new home bonus historically in this council by never building it into the base budget. Yeah, that means that sort of variance is, while not necessarily nice, is also tolerable, and you'll see it sits in the approved budget at a £0 because it's still not factored in.
No, thank you.
Brilliant. Questions? I suppose my question is kind of it's not really in the paper, it's more of a generic question, is how do we balance, given government's desire to dissolve Perth and the county in the coming years, and at the pace they're moving at, that may not be too many years away. They're looking at 28, 29, 30 at a maximum. And this MTFS kind of carries us through to a period where perhaps the existence of a district council might be a bit woolly. How do we balance desire to ensure that Lichfield residents' council tax is spent on things that are important to them against taking a mature and sensible approach to ensuring that we don't over the future unitary by turning up with a bank balance, having spent it all on projects across Lichfield district in an attempt to empty the piggy bank before that happens. Because I think there's actually, I think all of us as elected councillors would say that this is Lichfield residents' council tax. We want it to be spent on the things that are important to them. Equally, I think our 151 officer would probably have things to say about that and understand. Actually, you know, the future unitary, if that is the way that government wants to push us, we don't want to start off on the wrong foot. I'm just wondering how we manage that through the MTFS, and as we go through this budget setting process, you know, and this year I think is, you know, it's too early to be considering it now, but certainly as we move into it for next year, it would seem daft of us to pretend that it's not happening. Although certainly in other meetings I am trying to pretend it's not happening. But I think it is. But so I'm just wondering how do we deal with that through the MTFS in a responsible way?
I think the next 12 months are going to be absolutely crucial for this. We have seen from the experience of other councils through their path towards unitarisation that there will come a point at which what you've talked about in terms of councils spending all the reserves will be prevented by the government by statute. So there will be a guillotine. So what's incumbent on us, the cabinet, and on, frankly, members from all parties, is to work together to draw up what is really important to people here in Lichfield, to find a path to delivering that, frankly, in the financial year, in a short period thereafter. But I think that requires us to take quite a mature and quite a careful approach, in that we're not going to hare ahead white elephant projects, because that's not how we've ever worked and will continue to be prudent and careful. But it also places a bit of a rocket under those projects that we really do want to deliver and are ambitious towards. On the-
It's not a white elephant, just to be clear.
No, I'm not saying that.
Carry on.
I'm not quite saying that. But I think the other point that it's worth making is that there are some concerning elements of reorganisation, and I'm straying slightly off topic, but I think it's worth making the point.
Yeah.
There are concerning elements around reorganisation in that the formation of some forms of unitary would effectively place cities and towns that are in natural commercial competition against each other within the same council head. And it is a council that has the responsibility for delivering the health of those areas, which has been traditionally the preserve of districts and boroughs. And so that is something that I think we'll have to be very mature about as we go forward. As we look to really deliver what is important to help Lichfield and Burntwood and the surrounding villages to thrive in what is potentially the future hostile environment. That's a concern that I have.
Yeah.
But that is probably another debate for another place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just add, can I answer as well as
Yeah,
a section 151 officer? So I think the council's already taken some steps. So the table Councillor Sylvester Hall referred to, where you're committing £25 million in the capital programme to deliver projects, which does reduce the reserves and the investments quite significantly, but that means there is less reserves at the end of the period, not in a haphazard or imprudent way, but there's still reserves there. When we prepare an MTFS, it's prepared on what's known as a going concern basis. So that assumes that we will remain in existence till there's an Act of Parliament which dissolves us. And I suppose the final point I'll make this as a 151 and a resident, that irrespective of the structure that's here to deliver services, the residents will be the residents. And if we were imprudent or we did things that were not long-term or sustainable, those residents will still feel the impact, irrespective of whether this council or another council delivering the services.
Absolutely.
And on a final point of clarification, I think it's safe to say that we had committed to those projects and their delivery before we knew that anybody was trying to dissolve us.
Yes.
It's not a knee jerk or a reaction to it. That is us delivering what I think is important in a, as you say, prudent and careful manner for the good of the residents.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was the other question that was on the bottom of my list that I was hoping that would be raised, notwithstanding everything else that's already been discussed before I got here. I think the impact of potentially Diblish and local government reorganisation is something that, when we look at the finances, is absolutely something that we need to be paying extremely close attention to, because this is the funds that have been paid into also by the residents of Lichfield in the district in the widest capacity, and I think absolutely should be those that benefit from them. Either the projects that are already in the plan and in the pipeline, or those that are due to be coming in. And I think knowing and being able to see and witness what's happened elsewhere across the country when unitarisation has come through, that we need to make sure that we learn from those lessons, us as a council, and obviously working with yourselves as the officers for the benefit of the Lichfield, Burntwood and the villages residents, for sure.
Great. Thank you. Right. Any more questions on the NCFS? If not, let's move to the recommendations. And Rob, you just want to remind us, so we've obviously got a budget that's put before us, as Councillor Strachan has said. There will be further debate around that, I think, ahead of full council. Not I think, there absolutely will be debate. Further debate around that. So there's a slight caveat in one of the recommendations that's coming forward, just to recognise the fact there's still some fine tuning of that budget to be done, so we can ensure there's a budget, a legal budget that is passed to enable us to continue operating as a council beyond the budget.
Yeah. Well, in that case, subject to that amendment in 2.1, I move recommendations 2.1 through 2.17.
Right. Thank you, councillor Strachan. If we're in favour, we can vote for it. That's unanimous. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, councillor Strachan, for the paper that you talked us through this evening. And thank you very much for attending it.
Was 1.5, Leader, 1.5.
That brings us to a close this evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.